This is Chris Casey, Managing Director at Windrock Wealth Management. And today we have the pleasure of being joined by a man who requires really no introductions, a staunch defender of free markets throughout his career, former congressman, presidential candidate, and author, Dr. Ron Paul. Dr. Paul, thank you for joining us.
Oh, good. Good to be with you. Thank you.
Now, in 2009, you wrote an excellent book called End the Fed, which provided the legal, kind of economic and moral case against the Federal Reserve and central banking in general. And I guess from a practical level, too, you had some arguments in there. Can you just tell us why you believe the Federal Reserve is largely at the root of our economic problems?
Well, I think the evidence is pretty clear because they're economic planners. They get involved and they want to rig prices, and the most important price in the economy is the price of money, which is the interest rate. So they rig that and manipulate it, supposedly to help business, but it interferes with the marketplace. I think one thing that really has always bothered me over the years is this monopoly control over the size and scope of money. And this is nothing more than a grand invitation to all the special interests to go to government, because the Federal Reserve, has come about with Congress's condolences and the Federal Reserve Act. So if they can create money, this is a very, very powerful weapon. It's a dangerous weapon, but it can last for a while. And so therefore, if you lean toward minimal government or, a libertarian society where governments aren't supposed to take care of us from cradle to grave, what they do is they create the financing. So then it would be very natural to expect to have a welfare warfare state, excessive spending, deficits, and a loss of liberty, fighting wars we don't need. So there are so many things tied to the Federal Reserve, but there are some people who really, really love it. Originally it was said it would be the lender of last resort. Well, I think it's the lender of first resort now, because everybody gets the money in an effort to, have benefits one group over another. But it's to me part of the deep state, and you can control the money as a monopoly. It's very detrimental. It certainly contradicted everything the founders believed and what's in the Constitution. So there's a lot of reasons we shouldn't have it. But I would say the worst part about the Federal Reserve, it's a monopoly, and it's a monopoly control using counterfeit money to control the economy for special interests and to promote government, which is very detrimental to the people.
And by any measure, whether you look at their own so-called mandate of reasonable interest rates or low unemployment, or even the rationales at the onset of the Federal Reserve, right? The reduce bank failures, stabilize prices, tame the business cycle. I mean, if you look at pre and post Federal Reserve, it's been a complete disaster. And why do you think that is? Is it something inherently flawed about it, or is it poor leadership, or what's the main cause?
Yeah, well, back in the beginning of the last century, it was just that they didn't, the people who were gaining power, they didn't want to have to lose any money. They had to have people come to their rescue. And literally, they wanted to undermine the marketplace, because in a free market, the consumers are supposed to be in charge. If they don't buy products, or the product costs too much, they're going to back away, and companies can get into trouble, and they might not be able to borrow money to get out. And so the market wants to cleanse the market of inefficiency, and it always wants to benefit the consumer to give the best product for the best price, and the consumer, therefore, it gets hurt. Once you get into this intervention, and then they decide, well, the businessman has to be in existence, and he takes risks, so we have to help him out. And then the same way with labor, they say, well, labor is very important. The other people, we have to make sure that their wages are as high as possible, even if it's above what the market dictates. So they get involved for the special interests of labor, banking, special interest, war. And this then consumes all the efforts, and the consumer is left behind. The consumer, the average middle class individual, loses out. And after a period of time, what always happens is the value of the currency is destroyed. It keeps going down. And of course, when I got interested in this way back in the 60s, you know, gold was $35 an ounce. We weren't allowed to own it. We finally got to own it, and now it's $1,500. You know, it doesn't help us at all. And people suffer, and that's why they suffer from the price inflation, but they also suffer from the malinvestment. Money goes to the wrong places. It goes to big corporations and the bank. But Mises mentions in Human Action that if you destroy a currency, you destroy the middle class. If you have a good currency, you will have a big middle class. And I think our history has sort of proven that. The American system has generally been very favorably assessed to have protected the middle class. But now look at the middle class, in spite of the amount of prosperity we see. I mean, it's so great, but it's not best distributed. Not that it should be evenly distributed, but it should be more designed by markets rather than by political power and manipulation of interest rates and manipulation of Congress's spending money and fiscal policy. So the one thing that really bugs me, though, under today's condition is there's people saying, well, yeah, this is a terrible thing. See what free markets do. That's why we need socialism. And I don't think the conservatives are very good in pointing out, don't accept that, because they're not, you can't equate what we have with free markets. Matter of fact, we have a horrible, horrible system designed to help the special interests, designed to do many of the things the far left and the socialists, complain about. Of course, their answer is, what we really need is we need to be in government, and we would make sure the goods and services would be evenly distributed, and we would manage the society better. Of course, the libertarian answer is no, the people should be managing this, and the government should be very strictly limited to protecting individual liberty and a sound currency.
I know when you were a member on the House Financial Services Committee, you got to know a number of the Federal Reserve chairpersons over the years, namely at least Greenspan and Bernanke. Just from that, as well as kind of your knowledge of history and economics, who do you think were the best and worst Fed chairpersons?
Well, then none of them can be any good because they're working in a system that is wrong, and the system is designed to benefit the privileged. But there definitely was a difference. I think some were more serious, that they believe that this type of system will help the poor people, and they're not becoming billionaires, and they're not owned by the banking system. But others are. I think of Bernanke as coming in with the worst type of influence. I mean, philosophically, he was bad on monetary policy and thought the Fed should be always printing a lot more money. But then there were others. The one that was probably the biggest disappointment was Greenspan, because here he had a history of defending the gold standard and limited government and all, and then he went in there and he became part of the problem. Another individual that I sort of got along with, and he would have a decent discussion, and I don't think he became a multi-millionaire at all. Volcker is the one that he had not, obviously couldn't have good positions because the system shouldn't exist. So to pick the good and bad is more difficult, even though there definitely will be a variation. Some have been worse than others. Some have been more motivated. But Volcker, although he endorsed a lot of bad things, he was still. I liked him because he would at least have a conversation with me, even outside the hearings, and I sort of enjoyed that.
You famously sponsored Bill H.R. 1207 when you're in the House, and co-sponsored by Bernie Sanders, no less, in the Senate, and that was calling for an audit of the Federal Reserve. Why do you feel that is important, and what do you think they would find?
Well, I'm not very optimistic that they will ever get that done, because the powers to be won't allow it to happen. Then you say, well, why introduce it? Well, mainly because when I went to Congress, nobody had made the Federal Reserve an issue at all. Nobody paid any attention to it. So it was a vehicle to call attention to the Federal Reserve. And liberals and conservatives like transparency. So if you say, why aren't they transparent? You know, they create trillions of dollars. Don't you think we should know what they're doing? And that was, you know, a good opening. And we were able to get the bill passed in the House a couple times where we would have it. And I believe the audit would lead toward more criticism of the Federal Reserve, and maybe to a point when it becomes absolutely necessary that we need a new monetary system, maybe they would go in the right direction. But I just don't. I think we should do what we can, get as many people there that agree with this, and get the conversation going. But I think the odds of us all of a sudden getting a Congress that would see to it that you know, the Fed is reined in, because Republicans and Democrats are deficit spenders, hugely so. I mean, just look at what they're doing now with the Republican administration. So they need the Fed. And on the short run, it's terrible. If all of a sudden you said, okay, what we have now is a, you know, gold standard, you can't print money, boy, there would be there'd be civil war. But we need to talk about the importance of it. But because of this transition being so difficult, that's why I talked a whole lot when I was in Congress, and even since then, for the competing currencies. Let you know, if this thing is going to go down, just let it go down and let people try to sort it out. But if somebody wants to get out of it and have an alternative to the government money, we ought to be able to do that. But history shows that one of the first things that new and old governments ever do is get monopoly control of the monetary system, because it's so powerful. Supposedly they think they can create wealth, but in doing so, they destroy wealth, because they end up, you know, manipulating the economy for the special interest. And then there's usually a crisis and a downturn, a depression, and recession. A lot of what we're seeing right now.
Let's say by some miracle they did perform an audit. Do you suspect their reported gold holdings are accurate? I think technically the Treasury owns the gold, but the Federal Reserve has a gold certificate against it. I mean, do you think they even have the gold?
It's real hard to say. It's probably sitting there, but maybe there's been commitments. They do loan gold. You know, the thing broke down, and tomorrow we say, okay, how much gold do we have? Put it on the table here. I want to know what we can do to, you know, design the value of our currency. For some reason, I don't think it's going to happen. So that's the problem. But if you just legalize it and let people use it, the gold will, you know, come out of the woodwork, and it would be used, and you could go from there. But when I was on the Gold Commission, I asked them to vote on, you know, restoring the gold standard and using gold. No, I think that was first, you know, just the audit of the Fed. And there were 17 of us on the board, and there were only 2 of us that voted to find out if the gold was really there. So people, but I think people care more now than they did back in the 70s. But there's still a lot of people who don't want to hear about it, don't understand it, because they're experts. They went through economic education in college, and they have a master's degree and a PhD in monetary policy, and they never mention the type of system that the libertarians might endorse.
Let's talk about the Fed's relationship with other central banks. How much coordination is there, or is it more like an OPEC cartel where they coordinate in theory, but everyone's kind of incentivized to cheat?
Well, I think there's a lot of coordination. I think when the crash came in 2008 and 2009, but the coordination mainly was important because we were running the reserve currency of the world and could do a lot of bailing out, and that's what we did. We literally, you know, created and shifted trillions of dollars around, you know, to try to, you know, get the economy going again, and to some degree, you know, it sort of worked. But it's something that continues. The whole purpose of the Federal Reserve is to prop up the stock market, and they will coordinate. You know, just this past week or two, when gold was going up so high, so fast, all of a sudden it went sharply down, and it was the Bank of International Settlements, which is the bank for the central bankers, you know, dumped a lot of gold into the market. Who knows? They might have used some of ours for all we know, IMF gold. But they manipulate the markets and they coordinate it.
In late 2008, we saw a dramatic pivot by Chairman Powell, right? They were raising rates and selling bond holdings, and then they started doing the exact opposite. Why do you think that was? Was it mainly politically influenced? Was it a reaction to the stock market, or did they see some really troubling signs in the economy which simply scared them?
Yeah, well, I think they had pumped that balance sheet up so high, and most traditional thinking, even for this current crop of economists, thought, well, that's a little bit high, so we'll have to do it. Then they started, reducing some of the balance sheet, and it worked a little bit, but it was still leading to a problem. Then the beginning of last year, they started actually, systematically taking some of the balance sheet and reducing it, and interest rates crept up. So minor, but it's such a fragile system, and the tools of manipulating interest rates and the balance sheet isn't a very fine-tuned instrument. So I think what finally happened there, I think was a very important thing that happened was, if Trump on the short run was exactly right. If you try to work your way back, and this is the reason I don't think it'll ever work, you work your way back by, curtailing the wild monetization of debt. And Trump knew what would happen. Interest rates would go up and the markets would go down, and the markets went down sharply. And so they sort of fussed and fumed for about 9 months. And then Powell was still doing that for a while. He didn't want to stop it, but the public pressure and the economic pressure was so great that he had to resort to it, especially after the repo market seized up, in September. That was when one morning the repo rate went up to 10% from 1%. And that's when they resorted and restored QE again. But this time they say, oh, it's not QE, it's just QE, But then they started monetizing debt directly. So what they're doing now is even not only as bad, but some people argue worse than what we had before, because there's a little bit more trickery going on. But if they say, well, what if they hadn't done that? I think we'd have been involved with a stock market slump. We're in a stock market slump now anyway. So a lot of stuff works temporarily, but long term, you have to revamp the whole system. On short term, it's pretty difficult to talk everybody in Congress, say, no more inflation of the money system. Oh, what if we have a virus that we have to deal with, and we need $8 billion to counteract a viral infection? We'll put more money, and I haven't figured out how that's going to take care of the infections that we're concerned about. But I think the big event was last fall in trying to deal with the problem you suggested. That is that the markets just couldn't handle it, and that's why they went back to QE, and that held for a while. But ultimately, the markets win out. Just like when they pretended that gold was $35 an ounce for 40 years, eventually the market says there's no way, and then that broke down and went from $35 up as high as $1,900, and it's still up and down, but it's still always devaluing the dollar and the gold price going up, because that's the ultimate measurement.
With our current debt burden, with the amount of money that's been pumped into the system, and with socialism really kind of being the philosophy du jour out there, what's our best, most realistic hope for getting out of this mess?
Well, I think it's pretty good that we're going to get out of it, because this is not it can't last. So something has to change, and this system will collapse. And I think there's a lot of people, I think compared to when I started in the 70s, there are very few young people I ever talked to that care. And when I did the campaignings, just in the last decade or so, all of a sudden there is a lot more interest. So I think the ideas are the most important. I think there is a significant amount of young people, despite all that you read about, that are interested in it, and they can use an adding machine in knowing that if you print money, it loses its value, and they'll figure it out in spite of all the demagoguing and the coverage that the socialists get. Is such a failed system. On the short run, though, there's a lot of pain and suffering we have to go through because we have to go through the bankruptcy. The debt has to be liquidated, and then the people have to be conditioned to have a new system. Then they have to be convinced that the best system is what we're talking about, and I think we're in better shape now for that. Take, for instance, we have the Mises Institute, which I think it's fantastic in economic education. But I think there's a lot of that going on, but it's something that we know this is going to fail. So I look at it that there are some positive things going on, but we have a lot more work. So I hope people like you keep your interest up and spread a message that there are answers to this. It's not like, oh, this is dead end. The world has ended. What can we do? And if you do nothing, that's what's going to happen. But I think we've advanced a lot. Technologically, we've advanced tremendously. And also in the understanding of monetary policy. The Austrian academics, can explain monetary policy better than the founders could. I mean, they had a lot of flaws in the system back then with bimetallism and different things like that. So, my answer to this is yes, we can have a positive thing, but it's not going to be just getting the politicians. It's not a political problem; it's an economic education problem. So therefore, we have to deal both. If people can get involved in politics and promote these ideas, I think that's fine. If they can't, and they can do something else to, get like-minded people to study this whole issue, the material is available for us to put it together after it comes down.
And speaking of which, how can listeners read more of your work or listen to more of your commentary?
Well, I already mentioned the Mises Institute, and of course, I've had a lot of activity. Right now, I'm concentrating on trying to get this message out, which is something I've done for these many years, and that is with the Ron Paul Liberty Report, which is a daily broadcast on the internet. And we talk a lot about foreign policy, and that's related to economic policy because you have to have all this money. But we also do a lot in economics, and so I invite people to tune in and subscribe. It's no cost at it to become a member on YouTube to watch it because our numbers are growing, and there's a lot of interest. But it's also every individual assuming some responsibility. This is why I'm impressed with so many people I've met during campaigning. They have their own organization, they have their group of people. So if you have one person to talk to, that's good. If you have 10, that's better. If you have your own organization, that's even better. Because we're eventually going to be eliminated from things like YouTube and Facebook and these things and Twitter. They're going to regulate. There's still a lot of benefit from it. I still get my message out that way, but we still have to have an ability of individuals having creative ideas on how to spread this message.
Well, Dr. Powell, thank you for your time today.
Great. Good to be with you.